The Bible is full of stories that inspire us and show us how faith can sustain us in the most difficult times. Among these narratives, we find the story of the lion's den, a man who lived in a time when being faithful to God was an act of courage, resilience, and deep trust. In a world where opposing forces rose up against those who followed the God of Israel, Daniel stood out for his integrity and devotion. His life teaches us about loyalty, courage, and, most importantly, about God's faithfulness to those who seek Him with all their heart. Now, let's dive into this journey and understand this remarkable story from the Old Testament. Daniel, a man whose life was marked by wisdom and faithfulness to God, lived in challenging times in Babylon, a powerful empire where the traditions and laws of the Israelites were disregarded. From a young age, Daniel and some other Jews were taken as prisoners to serve in the Babylonian court. However, his integrity, devotion to God, and ability to interpret dreams and visions set him apart from the others, earning him the trust and respect of the kings who came to the throne. When the Persian Empire took control of Babylon, Daniel continued to be an important figure in the government, serving the new ruler, King Darius. Darius soon recognized Daniel's value. Unlike his other advisors, who were often led by greed and vanity, Daniel was upright and possessed unusual wisdom. Scripture says that an excellent spirit was in him, Daniel 6 verse 3, which made his opinion valued. Darius, impressed by Daniel's loyalty and dedication, began to give him more responsibilities, which increased his influence and prestige in the kingdom. He was so valuable that the king even planned to make him leader of the entire province. However, this prominence also brought problems. Other leaders and governors who served alongside Daniel began to feel jealous. These men, driven by pride and ambition, could not bear to see a foreigner receiving so much recognition and honor in the royal court. They began to watch Daniel's every move, looking for any error or flaw that they could use against him. But Daniel was faithful and committed to God and to the king. He was honest in everything he did and offered no reason to be accused of corruption or disloyalty. When they realized that they could find no fault in his conduct, Daniel's enemies decided to attack what was most important to him: his faith in God. They knew that Daniel prayed every day, with great discipline, 3 times a day, facing Jerusalem, his homeland. Even far from Israel, he maintained his devotion and practiced his faith with dedication. So, these cunning men began to devise a plan that directly involved his spiritual life. They gathered together and went to the king with a proposal that would apparently elevate Darius's authority. A decree that for 30 days anyone who prayed to any god or man except the king himself would be thrown into the lion's den, Daniel 6 verse 7. The lion's den was used as a form of cruel and fatal punishment, where the condemned were thrown into it and quickly devoured by ravenous beasts. This decree, then, not only created a trap for Daniel, but it was also a way to elevate Darius by encouraging the worship of the king as a deity. Darius, perhaps unaware of the malicious intentions behind the proposal, was persuaded to sign the decree. In doing so, the king established an irrevocable law, in accordance with the tradition of the Medes and Persians, which stated that no royal order could be undone. To the conspirators, this meant that by continuing his practice of prayer, Daniel would inevitably violate the new law. And since the decree had been signed, not even the king could prevent the punishment from being carried out. Thus, Daniel found himself in a situation of great danger. He knew that if he continued to pray, he would be accused and condemned. However, his faith was stronger than his fear, and he was not willing to compromise his devotion to God in order to please men or save his own life. Daniel faced this trap with the same courage and faithfulness he had always shown, confident that the Lord was on his side no matter what happened. Daniel demonstrated remarkable courage in the face of the threat posed by the new law. Upon learning that the decree had been signed and that anyone who prayed to a god other than the king himself would be thrown into the lion's den, he could have adjusted his prayer habits, said his prayers in secret, or even stopped praying until the decree was no longer in force. However, Daniel did not allow the threat to influence his faith and devotion. He did not hesitate to continue his prayer routine, because, for him, his commitment to God was non-negotiable. The Bible reports that Daniel, as usual, knelt down 3 times a day, heading toward Jerusalem and prayed and gave thanks to the Lord. Daniel 6 verse 10. This verse highlights that Daniel remained steadfast, even knowing that there were spies ready to report him to the king. He did not try to hide or change his routine to avoid problems. On the contrary, he remained constant in his relationship with God. This decision, in a life-threatening context, reveals the depth of his trust in the Lord and his conviction that God was worthy of total faithfulness, regardless of the circumstances. Daniel was aware that his choice was not just a matter of habit, but an expression of his faith. He knew that the law was specifically designed to bind him, and this makes his action all the more courageous. With his life at stake, he chose to be faithful to his spiritual identity, preferring to face human consequences rather than dishonor God. This act of courage teaches us that true faith is not shaped by circumstances, but by the steadfastness of a heart that fully trusts God. Daniel teaches us that being faithful to God often requires us to make difficult and even risky decisions. He did not disregard the power of the decree, but believed that his devotion to the Lord was more important than his own safety. This courage to continue praying, even knowing that his disobedience to the decree could lead to his death, challenges us to reflect on what we are capable of doing for our faith. In our daily lives, we may not face a literal lion's den, but there are many situations that can challenge us to act in accordance with our principles and faith, even if it puts us in difficult situations or isolates us. Daniel teaches us that communion with God must be preserved above all else, and that it is often in times of pressure that our faith is truly revealed. Thus, his courage and perseverance in the face of the decree show us that, regardless of external circumstances, maintaining communion with God is the safest path, even when it seems risky. Daniel's trust was not in human power, but in God, and this is an example of faith that transcends generations, inspiring us to be courageous in our own journey of faith. Daniel's enemies, driven by envy and greed, wasted no time in monitoring his steps after the signing of the decree. As soon as they saw that Daniel was continuing to pray to God as usual, they rushed to King Darius to denounce him. They were not simply reporting a violation of the law. They were determined to destroy Daniel's reputation and remove any influence he had in the kingdom. In words full of contempt, they emphasized Daniel's origin, saying, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles of Judah, has no regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed." Daniel 6 verse 13. This disparaging tone reflected their disdain, trying to make the king see Daniel as a mere foreigner who was disobeying royal authority. The accuser's strategy was cruel and planned. They knew that Darius had entrusted Daniel with a position of prestige and that the king had affection and respect for him. Therefore, by bringing up this alleged disobedience, they hoped to put the king in a difficult position, forcing him to choose between his word and Daniel's life. This situation reveals how calculating Daniel's enemies were, using the king's loyalty to set a trap from which he could not escape. Upon hearing the denunciation, King Darius was deeply saddened. He recognized Daniel's worth and knew that he was not a man of disrespect, but someone whose faith in God guided him. The king, however, was bound by the rules of the kingdom he ruled. The law of the Medes and Persians, once signed, was irrevocable and could not be changed, not even by the king himself. Even if he had wanted to save Daniel, Darius' hands were tied by his own decree. This moment of anguish and dilemma for Darius reveals something important. Even kings, with all their power, can find themselves limited and vulnerable when their actions are based on external influences and manipulation. The love and respect he had for Daniel were not enough to overcome the inflexible laws of the empire. The king had fallen into the trap of those who wanted to harm Daniel, and now the sentence seemed inevitable. The denunciation of his enemies shows how much envy can lead people to cold and calculated actions. These men were willing to do anything to destroy Daniel, including manipulating the king himself and exploiting a law for their own personal interests. Daniel, however, remained calm in his faith, for he knew that his life was in the hands of God, not in the hands of men. When the critical moment arrived, King Darius found himself powerless, with no way to circumvent the sentence imposed by his own hand. He spent the day trying to find a way to save Daniel, but the laws of the Medes and Persians were irrevocable, and he was caught in the very trap that the envious had set for his most trusted advisor. In the end, Darius had to surrender to the decree and order that Daniel be thrown into the lion's den. The order was given, and the guards prepared to throw Daniel into the pit. But first, the king did something surprising. Instead of saying goodbye or lamenting, Darius uttered a phrase of hope and faith. "Your God, whom you serve continually, will deliver you." Daniel 6 verse 16. This phrase reveals a little of the respect and admiration that the king had for Daniel, and it also shows that Darius recognized, in some way, the power and faithfulness of Daniel's God, even if he did not fully understand it. Darius's statement also reveals a mixture of hope and helplessness. In saying this, the king was not only expressing his desire for Daniel to be saved, but also recognizing that, in that situation, only a miracle could reverse the fate of his faithful advisor. The king, then, had to trust in something greater than his own power, even though he himself was not a man of faith in the God of Israel. The Bible gives us a glimpse of Daniel's faith at this moment. Even though he said nothing before he was thrown into the pit, his courage and calmness in accepting the sentence demonstrated that he trusted the Lord completely, regardless of the outcome. For Daniel, the most important thing was to be faithful to God, and not to seek his own safety. This surrender is a powerful lesson in trust and courage, showing that true faith does not waver, even in the most challenging situations. Darius, however, spent the night awake, unable to rest. The decision to throw Daniel to the lions tormented him, and he knew that what was at stake was not only Daniel's life, but also his own integrity as king. This episode reveals the fragility of human laws in the face of God's sovereignty. While the king tried in vain to save his advisor, the Lord already had a plan in place to free him in a way that everyone would witness as proof of his power. So Daniel was thrown into the pit, but his faith was unshakable. He trusted that the God he served would continually take care of his destiny, even in the face of the lions. This moment represents Daniel's total surrender to God and teaches us that, in seemingly hopeless situations, we can trust that the Lord is present and that his power is capable of protecting us from any evil. That night, Darius's worry was so intense that he could not sleep a wink. His heart was restless, overcome by uncertainty and the weight of responsibility. The king fasted and removed any type of distraction that could ease his mind. He was anxious about Daniel's fate, imagining what had happened in the darkness of the lion's den. He knew that, in human eyes, the situation was desperate, but there was still hope in the power of the God that Daniel served so much. At dawn, Darius barely waited for the sun to rise. In a desperate rush, he made his way to the den, full of anticipation and fear at the same time. When he arrived, his voice trembled as he cried out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Daniel 6 verse 20. The question was filled with anxiety and hope, reflecting the king's desire to see a miracle that would defy the laws of nature and the kingdom. To the king's surprise and relief, a voice echoed from within the den. Daniel answered, "My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they would not harm me." Daniel 6 verse 22. That answer was confirmation that the impossible had happened. God, in his faithfulness, had intervened in a supernatural way, sending an angel to protect Daniel. The lions, which would have naturally attacked, were peaceful, as if they recognized the presence of a higher power in that den. This moment represents one of the most impressive miracles recorded in the Bible, where God demonstrated his sovereignty and care for those who trust in him. The presence of the angel, sent to close the lions' mouths, is a reminder that even in the midst of the greatest dangers, God has the power to deliver and protect. Daniel was not only saved from death, but his faith was also strengthened by the divine intervention he witnessed. Daniel's response does not speak of resentment, fear, or doubt. Instead, it reflects a complete trust in God. He knew, even at that critical moment, that he was not alone. Daniel could have been consumed by fear or despair, but his faith sustained him, and God honored that faith in an extraordinary way. To King Darius and all who witnessed the miracle, it was clear that Daniel's God was different from the other gods of the empire. This God was alive, powerful, and faithful, able to act where no one else could. The miracle in the den was not just a sign to Daniel, but a declaration to the entire kingdom that God is worthy of worship and that he cares for those who are faithful to him. The miracle that saved Daniel was a clear testimony to God's faithfulness. He saw Daniel's integrity and unwavering commitment and intervened in an extraordinary way, showing that his power goes beyond natural forces. Daniel was not devoured by the lions, and this silent but great victory deeply impacted all who heard about what had happened. God's strength and love were revealed in an undeniable way, demonstrating that he is faithful and never abandons those who stand firm in his word. Daniel, in choosing to obey God even in the face of a deadly decree, put his own life at risk, but his trust was firmly anchored in his faith. God, who observes the heart and knows our motives, rewarded this genuine and steadfast faith. The lion's den became, in fact, a place where God's power was manifested. Rather than representing Daniel's end, the pit was the scene of a miracle that manifested the power of God and the faith of the one who served him without fear. This story also inspires us to remember that the Lord is always present, even in the most trying times and when everything seems hopeless. Just as he closed the mouths of the lions and protected Daniel, God is able to intervene in our lives in ways we cannot even imagine. His faithfulness is not conditioned by circumstances, but rather by his unchanging character and his love for those who belong to him. In the end, Daniel's faith was not only preserved, but strengthened. He emerged from the lion's den not only alive, but as a living example of God's grace and faithfulness. This story teaches that God's faithfulness is steadfast and that he honors those who honor him, protecting and caring for them, regardless of difficulties or threats. The lesson is that the Lord is trustworthy, and his power is greater than any challenge we may face. After the miracle, King Darius ordered that Daniel's accusers, along with their families, be thrown into the lion's den. The Bible says that before they even fell into the pit, the lions had already torn them apart. Daniel 6 verse 24. This punishment serves as a warning that God's justice never fails, and those who plot evil against his servants do not go unpunished. Shocked by what had happened, King Darius issued a proclamation to the entire kingdom, declaring, "Let all my people tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God who endures forever." Daniel 6 verse 26. This decree was a way of honoring God and showing that he was the true king. Because of Daniel's faith, God's name was exalted throughout Babylon. Daniel did not bow down to his circumstances, but remained faithful, and God honored this faithfulness in an impressive way. This episode is not only an example of divine power, but also a reminder that even when all seems lost, God is by our side, ready to act. We see that the testimony of genuine faith can impact the lives of others, even those who do not know God, as happened with King Darius. Upon witnessing the miracle, he recognized the power of Daniel's God and proclaimed his greatness to the kingdom. This story, then, challenges us to trust in God in all circumstances, knowing that he is faithful and worthy of all our devotion, always honoring those who serve him with sincerity and love.